Let me show you how to make a graph in Logger Pro. It's pretty easy. All you have to do is launch Logger Pro. It's out of the way. You launch the Logger Pro software. It should default to creating an XY graph. If I want to put force on the vertical axis, I want to make it the Y variable, and I can change it from Y. I can name it force instead. Give it a symbol like the letter F. Put my units on. Now the units for force are newtons, but all of the forces in this lab will be really small. So instead of having to type in tons of zeros and decimal points, I'm going to put the power. I'll put e to the negative 10th power. So there'll be to the negative times 10 to the negative 10 newtons will be my unit for newtons of force. And so that shows up here on the vertical axis. And actually, I don't need the parentheses there. They come automatically, so we'll take those off. There we go. It looks better. And if I want to put, say, distance between the masses over here as my horizontal variable, make distance. So I'll type distance in and give that letter D. The units of distance will be meters. We'll put an M there. Now I'm set to do distance to look at different distances, what that does to the force. So I'll go ahead and type in a couple of data points here. I just made these up, so these won't necessarily be the ones you had in your lab. Let's say that I had them 1 meter apart, and I get a force of 66.7 times 10 to the negative 10th newtons. So I'll just type in 66.7 since my unit is to the negative 10th power. Then at 2 meters, say I had 33.4, 3 meters, 22.2, and at 4 meters, 16.7. Okay, so there's just an example of 4 data points. I'm beginning to see a relationship here. I see the data point showing up on the graph. Doesn't look very linear. I can see some sort of a curve here, maybe a parabola, maybe another kind of shape. But I can see that as the distance gets bigger, the force is decreasing, it's becoming smaller. And if I want to, the graph looks pretty good. The only thing that's really missing is a title. So if I double click on the graph itself, it brings up the graph options box. And it's got axes options. If I click on graph options, I can type a title in. So maybe force versus distance for 2 masses. Now my title shows up at the top of the graph. And now I need to fit this with some sort of a function, a best fit line or curve. And so that shortcut key is right here. If I click on the curve fit button, it shows me kind of a small view of my graph, this curve here. And then I get a whole bunch of different functions to pick from. I can try the different functions out and see how well they fit. So if you want to try a function, just click try fit and you can see what that looks like. So yeah, that doesn't look so good. A linear function with an intercept, a little bit better, but the function looks kind of curved, not linear. And so I've got all kinds of different curved functions I can pick from, whether that's quadratic, which would be like a parabola, and it's kind of okay. I don't know, they're not an exact fit. Maybe it's a parabola, but use your common sense here. Think about what the implication of that is. That would mean that as you get further and further away, the force gets smaller and smaller, but then as you continue to get further away, the force suddenly becomes bigger. And that doesn't really make much sense. The force will get bigger again. I expect it just to continue getting smaller. So you can kind of use that logic to help you figure out what function will fit. And you'll notice that for these higher powers, like the quadratic, to the 3rd power, to the 4th power, to the 5th power, you got to be careful with those. If you only have like 3 or 4 data points, a 4th power function will fit any 4 points in space, so it's not necessarily an indication that it's the right function to fit it. Maybe a power function might be a better fit here. Oh, that seems to fit pretty good. And if you see something like this where we have our function is, say, to the negative power, it's almost to the -1 power, you might recognize that taking something to the -1 is the same thing as just dividing it, taking its inverse. So I should get really the same function here as the inverse. And wow, an inverse function seems to fit this really good. it makes sense that as the distance gets bigger, the force would just keep getting smaller and smaller. So I like this. I'll click on it. It adds it to my graph. I'll just kind of move this over a little bit so that it's not in the way. This graph's great. It's ready to go. It's ready to be printed. And when you want to print it out, you go to File, and remember when you choose Print, don't choose the Print function, choose Print Graph. We just want the graph. We don't need anything else. Put your name in there for the footer, and you can click OK, and then it'll be ready to print. You can see what it looks like there, and you're ready to go.